QIMR Berghofer acknowledges the traditional and cultural custodians of the lands, waters and seas across Queensland, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. We support the cultural knowledge, determination and commitment of First Nations communities in caring for health and well-being for millennia.
Welcome to QIMR Berghofer's 80th anniversary podcast. I'm Claire Blake, and we're celebrating 8 decades of bold ideas, real science, and the brilliant men and women who made it happen. We did start in a leaky old army hut, and now we're tackling cancer, decoding the brain, tracking infectious diseases, and rewriting what's possible in medicine. We'll dive into the true stories, funny, messy, inspiring, from the people who made it all happen, and those carrying the torch into the future, because science isn't just labs and data, it's human. And it's happening right here. In this episode, one of our most respected researchers, Professor Adele Green, Companion of the Order of Australia. She's a Queensland great, and her work has changed the way the world understands skin cancer. From her landmark studies on sun protection to her ongoing global influence in public health, she has shaped lives far beyond the lab. And I can't wait to hear some of the stories. Welcome, Adele.
Thank you.
Now, you were working as a doctor and then things shifted.
I was working at the Mater Hospital as a registrar there in internal medicine, and I was very concerned that I wasn't helping people as much as I liked. People who had hypertension and cardiovascular disease, they seemed to be just still smoking, eating fast food, and their blood pressure wasn't going down, which is the main thing. And so I was talking to the clinical supervisor at the Mater Hospital about how I'd really like to go upstream from disease and try and find out what's causing the disease, and then perhaps we could help people better by preventing them and helping them take charge of their own health for a little while. And he said, why don't you go and talk to our own state research institute, QIMR, the Queensland Institute of Medical Research. I said, oh, I didn't really know that there was an institute like that. So I'm afraid that that's when that was, and that was in 1979. I followed his advice, came and talked to the director, Dr. Chev Kidson, who received me and was interested that a doctor wanted to do some research, but he got a little bit more interested when he found out that I'd actually already had 2 papers published as a medical student. Therefore, he helped me write an application to the NHMRC for a scholarship. So the next thing I found, I was at QIMR as a PhD student. So my busy days in the wards were suddenly cut to being very isolated, because I was the first person at QIMR that wasn't in a wet lab. Because when I arrived, I said, I'd like to do epidemiology and find out what's causing diseases. And he said, oh, well, what lab would you like to work in? And I said, oh, no, I don't want to work in a lab. I'd like to do epidemiology. And he said, all right. So they didn't have any desks for me, so I ended up in the sick bay, in a desk at the back of the sick bay. And so when people came in with migraines and period pains, they'd be lying there moaning, and I was sitting in the back, but that was the only contacts I ever saw, really, as I was deep in the sick bay. And then finally, Chev took pity on me and moved me into the library. That was the start of the Epi unit in 1980. That was my first experience of QIMR. It was really like a big happy family then, in those days. Far fewer staff, a much tighter administration, and smaller, of course. But really, under Chev Kidson, things expanded rapidly and exponentially, and he was responsible for opening a whole lot of new avenues, which, of course, we're still pursuing with excellence today.
The stories about Chev just paint him as such an innovator, proactive.
Yes, encouraging. People like me, and who else was employed by Chev Kidson with very much the same record was Michael Good, who of course ended up as director of QIMR, and I was his deputy. But we were both recruited as young doctors by Chev Kidson. Michael was more in line with the infectious disease theme, which is what, of course, QIMR was founded for. And as you say, Chev was open to this diversity. That's what his hallmark was opening it up. And of course, cancer had been studied in very specific terms, but he was actually a biochemist and broadened the QIMR portfolio enormously.
You went on to assemble a pretty stellar team. I'm assuming that didn't happen in the sick bay.
Oh, it certainly did not, and it didn't happen from the library either. In fact, there was a lot in between that. I had a lot of learning to do, and so I did a lot of training before I even had my first team. After my PhD, again was lucky enough to get an NHMRC postdoctoral fellowship to go overseas, which is de rigueur and still very helpful, I think, for PhD students to spread their wings and go from their home institute. And so I went over to London and Oxford and Boston to Harvard in my postdoc years. So I was still learning the ropes of research, really, from a wonderful array of mentors in those places where epidemiology and public health was being carried out at a much more sophisticated level, I would have to say, than Australia. And of course what they had, which we didn't have, was large populations, which is what epidemiologists need. And so I learnt a lot there. Really didn't have any team of my own until I came back. And the person who really helped me, again, I've had a lot of help. You really don't get by in the research world without mentors and colleagues. And the mentor in this case who helped me was Professor Bob McLennan. And he said, well, you've done melanoma as your PhD topic. You need to get a project for when you come back here. What would you like to study? And I said, well, a cogenitor with melanoma is the more common skin cancer called keratinocyte cancers, or BCC and SCC. We didn't know in Queensland how many skin cancers got diagnosed every year, would you believe? We just knew that we had almost like an epidemic of skin cancer, but we didn't know how many BCCs and SCCs were present in the Australian community. We knew it was a big health burden, but it hadn't been counted. Grist for the mill for an epidemiologist. We love counting and quantifying and finding out what disease burdens are. Bob helped me get a grant with the then called Queensland Cancer Fund, and that was really the start of it, where my little team first was established. And that first study was in Nambour, where we counted skin cancers on people. We didn't do anything else. We just had a huge survey in 1986 at the Maroochy Shire Council Chambers. The whole of the epi unit then came up and volunteered a whole week in Nambour. That's the sort of collegiate support that we gave each other in those days. Nick Martin came up and gave his week up there when we were early colleagues. Leah Jackman, who's working still at QIMR today, she came up and was a research assistant. Members of my family working in the background. Members of the Australian College of Dermatologists come up and give their time for free to examine thousands of people. And that was the first time that we could say, because we randomly picked them from the electoral roll, this is how many skin cancers people have on their skin at any one time, what we call a prevalence study. After that we progressed to, well, we know now how many people have got skin cancers present on their skin at any one time, how quickly do they develop, and that's the incidence studies that we did, and that was then the next big step, and that was when the team was really starting to be assembled now, and we were getting to be quite expert in ultraviolet carcinogenesis.
And still very fondly remembered in Nambour. Now that team was...
Well, in the early days, there was a young woman called Jade, and it was just her and me and Bob McLennan who really started off, but gradually we got some PhD students, and then after counting how many on the skin there were, prevalence, and then when we'd worked out, all by post, by people telling us their doctors and when they'd last seen their doctor for a skin cancer, and then we did all of this computation in the background. Diana Batistuta was the statistician who did all of that number crunching. The next stage, which was of course the huge breakthrough, was the very biggest challenge, was a big clinical trial whether sunscreen could prevent skin cancer. So that was the next big stage, and that's really when the team took off. Lots of volunteers. Peter Parsons was remarkable. He and his wife came up and worked every study weekend for months and over the years. So I would single him out as being a powerhouse with his work. Other teams from UQ as well. Another remarkable collaborator was Gail Williams, the lead statistician who really made all of the breakthroughs appear because of her brilliant statistical analyses. We had Phil Gaffney, who was a biochemist, and he helped us with the bloods and the biochemistry of the bloods, and not to mention the dermatologists and the doctors who were part of it as well in Nambour.
QIMR was still quite small. At this stage you're in the Bancroft building?
That's right. Yes, we were in Bancroft Building, and then, well, we started off in the surveys up on Bramston Terrace, and then we came into the Bancroft Centre when we were starting out Nambour study. In fact, we were probably there for the whole time the trial was there, and then we moved into the CCR building for the follow-up phase of Nambour.
And reports are that yours was a very happy team.
Yes, I feel privileged, and I had that sort of positive feedback. I think it was a virtuous cycle. We were all motivated to do something for the common good. We were curiosity driven. I had a vision that was fed in and supported by my team, and I think we were very open and honest, and the spirit of the team was remarkable and different. We rarely had disputes. Of course, there was ups and downs, but such were the people and the calibre of the people. Harmony was definitely the leitmotif of our team. People loved coming to work, and you could feel the curiosity, discovery type of atmosphere. So it was very exciting. I loved coming to work.
So did David Whiteman and Rachel Neal. Apparently you had to break up some big barneys. Robust discussion.
Well, robust discussion is probably how we'd put it. They must have kept the barneys to themselves. I know I had to break them up from a lot of gossiping and anecdote. They had a couple of other PhD colleagues at that time, and they were all in one big room, and I often came in there all huddled over, killing themselves laughing, which was not what we really expected in a serious research team. Christine Frost was another PhD student there, and David Purdy, along with Rachel and David Whiteman. And so they were a marvellous bunch together, but I think that they socialised together, and you need that. You need the humour and the balance. The balance. You certainly do, to celebrate good fortune, to support each other in personal things as well. I had a standard motto that if there's anything in your personal life that is not going well for you, attend to that. Women, of course, their situation was totally understood. I was a working mother and therefore had great empathy, and loved having women coming and working with me, and we could show them that women were just as capable. And I rarely actually experienced discrimination in my time at QIMR, which is another great blessing of doing research as a career.
Did you socialise with the other teams, the other groups?
Yes, we did. The EPI unit, as I said, started off from N=1. We grew with Bob McLennan's advent, Nick Martin. So they were the two crucial other team members, and together our groups were all on one floor, which was the director's floor at that stage, the Bancroft Centre. And we had great parties together in terms of celebrating grants, high-level papers, high-impact papers. So that was a lot of socialising. I mean, socialising in the workday, en masse celebrations were, I think, something that really did knit us, and that was a great precedent. And maybe that's when we broke away from Bob's team and Nick's team, and the Cancer Epi unit really got established. We carried on that familial atmosphere and supporting each other. It was certainly not a stuffy atmosphere, and it was certainly not, I would say, a type of office where people would send emails to people who were about 4 lab benches down or whatever, instead of going and talking to them. And I would have discouraged that totally, and I think that was if you're there with personal contact, that made things happen. It does bear reflecting that work from home is the absolute opposite of what we enjoyed. While you can work from home, I think we had the best of it when we were all together, and of course out of that sometimes great inspiration came from just chatting away informally.
I would like to picture the celebration, because you famously, in one of the biggest breakthroughs in QIMR Berghofer's history, were able to show that using sunscreen prevents skin cancer. What was that day like?
Well, of course, that was very long in the making. It was, again, Gail Williams, whose prowess looked at the data in a way that was so rigorous. But I would say to you, Claire, that was built up on the shoulders of people who were at the top of their game in dermatology and dermatopathology. David Whedon, who's one of the world's top dermatopathologists, for free examined every single biopsy of our skin. So we had one of the world's best dermatopathologists. So when we had those data come through, and we put that against the sunscreen exposure, which our research nurses had measured very carefully, that was, of course, huge when we saw that the squamous cell carcinomas were cut by such a huge amount with regular sunscreen use. That day was really only the tip of the iceberg of enormous preparation, donation of time, people who examined the skins that showed the skin cancers that did develop in the people who were not using sunscreen versus the people who had protected skin. That was 23 members of the Australian College of Dermatology who came up every weekend for years to help on these surveys. It was all volunteer work. We could never have employed at professional rates the teams that gave rise to that breakthrough. So great teamwork, brilliant leaders in terms of knowing skin cancers on skin and under the microscope, and then great statisticians. So it was the ultimate expose from a fantastic team, many of whom are volunteers.
Extraordinary
Yes.
collaboration. And this would have been pre-internet largely. Post is how you contacted your
That's
participants.
exactly right. That we were print-based, and I personally, with my own pen, signed all those thousands of letters to keep that personal touch. I'd also say, I want to say how much the community themselves supported us. So the community support was simply amazing. We had 4 Rotary clubs, the Nambour Lions Club, St John's Ambulance, Red Cross, Burnside High School, and they rostered their members on to help with people lining up with their hospital gowns. The Nambour Hospital, of course, supplied us with access to the then maternity wing. Don't know
All
what
done
happened.
over the phone.
All of done over the phone and by personal visit. So we wore a bit of a highway up and back to Nambour, but it was 100 kilometres away. But it was just far enough away that it was its own community and had its own identity. The support was brilliant.
Tell us about that later team. That came in the 80s, really, didn't it?
Yes. By that stage, we ourselves had diversified. We looked at ovarian cancer in particular, and then David started doing a big study in esophageal cancer. So by that stage, I guess we were known. People could then relate over the internet, suddenly able to have many more international visitors, and that was probably part of that new phase as well, Claire. Suddenly, collaboration was so easy. In the previous days, you had to type out a paper, put it in the mail, and a month later you might know that the journal it submitted to had received it, and then 2 months later you might know that the journal had rejected it. Then you'd start all over again. That was the cycle. So firstly we had fax machines, and then we had the internet, and suddenly we all had computers, which we didn't have before. So I really saw through that whole evolution. But it was a revolution, all pre-COVID, of course, which made another quantum leap into having international collaborators in your living room on your computer screen, which we was never have dreamed of. Another interesting evolution in QIMR, that paper records were everything, and we had boxes and boxes of all of the paper records because we had nothing else, and we had a huge drive here to scan things. Same thing for medical journals and science journals, of course. That was all only printed, and then the journals themselves undertook massive scanning to make back copies available to scientists. And I think people just take it for granted now that something published in 1960 is going to be available online. But of course, it was not available online then. It was only available in the printed word. And if you were a PhD student in my day, we had to go to massive tomes called Index Medicus and look up the topic you wanted to look up, and then look down and see where the papers were published, and then go to the library. And of course QIMR had its own library and its own stacks. The information age and technology has transformed.
Sounds so time consuming.
Yes, precisely. So time is of the essence, but maybe I will say it was certainly better for the lack of pressure. So at least you weren't under pressure to constantly answer, have an email and you haven't responded in 24 hours, then somehow there's something wrong or you're not keeping up. And of course you just don't have that luxury with mail. While it's time consuming in one way, it's not so stressful. While we might have had mental health problems in those days, they weren't quite of the time pressure it works on our scientists now.
We know you inspired so many people, and not just here, all around the world, in the building, and continue to. Who inspired you?
My inspiration really came from reading and historical figures, really. They were my inspiration and my really early role models. People like Marie Curie and women who really paved the way. I was so impressed by that. But the people who directly paved my way were my mentors. Doug Gordon at University of Queensland. I've mentioned Chev Kidson. Bob McLennan also was a huge help and a great mentor. They were facilitators, they pointed the way, they opened up doors and opportunities, and that's what I tried to do for my staff and my group and my colleagues. We must know the context in which our research is done, and we know and acknowledge that we're standing on the shoulders of people who've gone before and paved the way and have done a lot of the building blocks of what we're building on now.
Clearly it worked. You've got some team members that have gone on and still going on and doing some amazing things.
Yes, and I'm particularly proud that I've got a lot of research-trained clinicians from our group, specialist clinicians, dermatologists in Europe, in England and Netherlands and United States. We've trained, and that means a lot. Research is, to me, the absolute underpinning of very good practice of clinical medicine. And really that's what we stand for here, substance and scientific evidence to getting better health. That's probably why it's been durable and why people are inspired to be better clinicians, because they've had research training. So I'm very pleased about that. And also the other thing, Claire, is we tried as the Epi unit, and I think QIMR does this very well, still to this day and probably even better than in our day, is linked with policymakers. There's no way you're going to make a difference with your science unless it is translated into health policy and the government listens to you. And so unless you've got good friends who understand that this evidence needs to be brought to the policy of the people, however that might be, in terms of what concessions can be made on drugs or decreasing taxes on sunscreen or what have you, or banning sunbeds. All these things can only happen when there's policy.
You made those connections.
Of course, we went out of our way to do that, to straddle both worlds, and we encouraged people in the health department to come, and we wanted to go in and talk to them. So it was fundamental to our modus operandi then to make sure that we articulated our science in a way that was understandable. To me, that was also very important in our team, that they were happy to stand and talk to the community. And community engagement, to me, is one of the main prongs of research. If we are going to do it full circle, you must give back to the community.
Well, that worked because population health are renowned for their relatability and going out. Let's mention some of those team members who went on to do amazing things.
David Whiteman, who was Deputy Director for some time, and Rachel Neal, they've both promulgated their work very articulately. I would say that that's probably one of the challenges for scientists, though. I found that quite challenging when I started out, making sure that the media got the right message and didn't portray it in a way that was invidious for the scientists. I mean, probably my worst experience was a reporter had talked to me about some of the work we had done on photoaging, which is premature aging of the skin from ultraviolet light from sunlight, because of course that's what ages our skin more than anything else is sunlight. I was saying this to the journalist after we'd published just how much photo damage there was in our community, and particularly among women who of course are very wrinkle conscious. And I said you can often tell Queensland women in even airport lounges in Europe because we are so sun exposed, and we unfortunately have got prematurely aged skin and wrinkled skin, and it's something that we can prevent if we could just protect ourselves. And the next day in the Courier Mail, the headline was, "Researcher says Queensland women are ugly." And my mother-in-law, who hadn't taken very good care of her skin and was a case in point, was most upset with me. She was an avid reader of the Courier Mail and said, "This is not how researchers are supposed to tell us about their scientific results." So that was a mistranslation of what I was actually trying to do.
And I guess you were very careful after that.
Very much so. And that's where I think you need to be experienced. It is so important. It's not to be something shied from. our young scientists need to know that media engagement is most important for telling the message and completing the wheel of research. It's crucial that we are approachable and that they understand what we're doing.
Over 40 years, you've seen through a few CEOs and directors. Any one of them stand out?
I think each of them were remarkable in their own ways. Michael Good I worked very closely with as a director, and he was inspirational, drive and encouragement of young people going through, and he also was open to the diversity of QIMR and brought in new streams of neuroimaging and neuroscience. And Frank Gannon then after that brought in something different again. So and of course I have to mention Laurie Powell, who was wonderful in his way of bringing clinicians much more into the fore and having research clinician scientists. So he really set a benchmark there too. So each director that I've worked with has brought their own special talents and gifts, and I think QIMR is the richer for it.
Did you ever think about taking on that role?
I worked for 13 years as a deputy director. Claire, I loved research too much, and I don't think you can manage a huge institute with that dedication and all-consuming passion that is required and have the same dedication and passion for your own research field. And so it was better for me to go back to my original passion, which was research, and my productivity increased enormously when I stepped back from that.
Just to finish, congratulations, happy 80th anniversary. How do you see QIMR Berghofer in the future?
I think one of the outstanding aspects of QIMR Berghofer is its diversity, the cross-section of basic science, population health and clinical science. And to me it's been a leader in that in Australia, and I hope that it will go on for the next 80 years and the 80 years after that, doing exactly that to really bring their mission to fulfilment of better health for the community.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Adele.
It has been a pleasure too for me. Thank you.